this is going to require every tool that we have in our toolbox. We are not going to be able to rely on all of the traditional programs that we do in the continental United States. And so we are working very closely with the governor to better understand all available options, whether that means longer term we bring in tiny houses or our transitional housing units to help him create the communities that he wants. We're not taking anything off the table, and we're going to be very creative in how we use our authorities to help build these communities and help people find a place to stay for the longer term.
And then I know that it's difficult to get staff and resources and equipment from the continental U.S. to Hawaii in an expeditious manner, but do you believe that you now have the staffing that you need to do a house-by-house search of the disaster area, looking for the deceased in an expeditious manner?
I mean, as I said in my opening remarks, we have an office right here on the island. And so that allowed us to integrate immediately. And it was through that coordination that we were able to move our initial urban search and rescue teams very quickly to get into the area and begin the process. As we have learned what the extent of this search and recovery mission is going to look like, we have sent more personnel as well as more cadaver dogs to come into the area. And they are working in conjunction with the Maui Fire Department and the Sheriff's Office to make sure that we are doing this in a very methodical way, but one that is also very respectful of the community, to make sure that we find everybody that is unaccounted for. And so I do believe that we have the right amount of personnel on the ground integrating in with the local officials to do this.
And what's your best estimate of how long that process will take?
We've had some initial estimates of how long it might take, but this is a really complicated situation. The dogs can only work so long because of how hot the temperatures are. There's also hot spots, and so we have fire crews that are helping to cool down the area so the dogs can go in there. I'd hate to give an exact estimate because we want to make sure that we are precise and methodical and respectful as we go through this.
Go ahead, Steve.
Is it possible for the president to visit without interfering with the rescue effort?
Right now, our focus is on making sure that we are doing everything we can to account for everybody that has been unaccounted for. And the president has given me the space to make sure I'm bringing in all of the appropriate federal personnel and resources to do that. And so we will continue to do that right now. We want to make sure that they have, all of the resources and the space that they need and not disrupt operations right now.
So no visit by the president is on schedule at this moment?
At this point, again, we just want to make sure that we are working to help this community identify everybody that's missing, and we need to stay focused on that right now.
Good.
Thank you, Administrator. Just to be clear, has the federal government been able to fulfill every request that the state has made so far for assistance, and are there any delays that you are aware of right now, given obviously the unique challenges of Hawaii's location?
The resources that are needed, we continue to work with the governor and his team to better understand what they need, and as soon as they make a request, we get that request in process. One thing that I talked with the governor and his team about is, even if you think that you might need something a week from now or 2 weeks from now, let us know ahead of time so we can get that resource moving. If we don't need it, we'll turn it around. So at this point, I have no awareness of anything that we have not been able to meet, and we will continue to build up our presence here on the island to support this. This is going to be a long-term recovery operation. We have the resources we need today, and as we continue to identify what the needs are, we'll continue to move more in.
And you mentioned how, obviously this is an ongoing, lengthy process. Cadaver dogs so far have only covered about 3% of the fire area. I think 96 victims have been discovered so far. Can you give us a sense just of how much should we be braced for? Are we talking hundreds of deaths here?
I would, again, defer you to the state for what they think the total estimate will be. You have to understand the situation on the ground right now. It is extremely hazardous. There are structures that are partially standing that engineers have to clear first to make sure it's safe for the search and rescue teams to go into, make sure it's safe for the dogs to go into. We also have to make sure the dogs are able to continue their job, and right, so they have their own work rest cycles. And so again, we want to make sure that we're doing this as quickly as possible, but that we do it in a way that's methodical and appropriate and culturally sensitive to make sure that we are going to be able to account for everybody. And so we need to give them the space and time to do that. We have brought in additional canine dogs, cadaver dogs. They are on the ground today, and I believe there's a few more coming, and additional search and rescue personnel to come in and support this effort.
Good, Sonia.
There are, I believe, tens of thousands of active duty military personnel in Hawaii. And I believe the Pentagon said this morning that they haven't yet gotten involved in any of the recovery efforts yet. Does FEMA see a need to get that personnel, that military personnel in Hawaii involved in the recovery efforts, in the aid distribution efforts, anything along those lines?
The Department of Defense is one of our strongest partners, and we work with them on all of these different types of severe weather events that we are responding to. We are in communication with Indo-PACOM here as to what resources we can utilize as we go into the recovery effort. We have already mission assigned the Army Corps of Engineers to help support the debris mission. And we will continue to work with the governor, again, to understand what resources he needs, and we will bring in whatever federal partner we can to support that. Very nice that we have a large military presence here that we can tap into that helps expedite getting those resources in place faster.
Good, Jordan.
Thanks, Administrator. The administration included $12 billion for the FEMA's disaster relief fund in the supplemental request sent to Congress last week. Given the extent of the wildfire damage, do you anticipate asking for more, essentially, to plus up that request, and will you submit that to Congress?
You know, as we were monitoring the health of the disaster relief fund, what we take into account, and we were anticipating what the deficit would be later in September, we took into account events just like this so we could support the initial response efforts. And so we do have adequate funding to do the response that we're doing right now, but we will need additional funding to ensure that all of our other recovery projects can continue and not get delayed until the next fiscal year.
Administrators Kelly O'Donnell from NBC. Can you speak to the issue of ongoing communications? In the earliest crisis, that was a problem and people getting information, whether it was the warning systems or any of that. But with towers down and difficulty, how much is the inability to communicate with the citizens, with each other, still an ongoing part of what you're dealing with, and what can be done to augment communication capabilities?
No, I can't speak to the initial communications and the warning. What we are really focused on right now is making sure that we do have continuous communication to help people understand what resources are available, what the next steps in the process are going to be, and where they can go to get more information. There's going to be plenty of time for us to go back and learn some lessons from how the initial event unfolded, but we really need to stay focused right now on making sure that they have accurate information on what resources are available, to make sure that they understand that they can register for assistance with FEMA, and that we are going to be able to provide them some additional support throughout this recovery process.
And if I could just follow up on that, but cell towers are down, people don't have access to their devices. Is there a concern that people aren't able to get the information simply because of the extent of the devastation?
There are some cell towers down, but where I was yesterday, I went into 2 different shelters on Saturday, another one on Sunday, and people had communication. They had cell phones, but we also have personnel in those shelters, and there's multiple shelters around the island, and we are continuing to send people into the shelters. The Red Cross is there, our personnel are there, and we're going to stand up a disaster recovery center here in the coming days, which will be a one-stop shop that will have federal personnel, state and local personnel, as well as the insurance industry, so people can start this process of rebuilding.
Thank you. Kayla Tausche, CNN. On funding, FEMA's own estimates have suggested that even just part of the recovery could cost north of $5 billion. Where are your estimates currently, and how much are you communicating to Congress and the White House that you'll need for this recovery?
There are a lot of reports out there right now talking about what they think that this potential what the potential cost of this disaster is going to be. FEMA has not put out any initial estimates. I think that there's a lot of other reports that are out there. It's really far too early to tell what the total cost is going to be. But as we continue to get better fidelity on the impact, as we can get into the area and assess the true extent of the infrastructure damage, that's when we'll have a better idea of what the total cost will be. But we really have to ensure right now that we are doing everything we can to account for the missing and make sure that it's safe for our responders to go in there and do this additional work.
And as you account for the missing, as these search and rescue efforts ramp up, do you have reason to believe that there are any survivors who aren't currently accounted for?
I hate to speculate on that. I mean, I think what we're going to find is people that have relocated somewhere and they're going to get reconnected with their family members. And sometimes it's just a matter of making sure that we can make that connection. The state has set up a family assistance center to help with that process. But as far as the area itself, what we're going to be doing is really looking for those that were left behind and making sure that we have our teams in place to help find those remains.
Way in the back.
Referring to reports about the activation of the warning sirens early on, do you anticipate there will be an investigation of this? And then when we look at other cities across the country that may be facing a similar threat due to increased vegetation, dryness from climate change, is there a preventative plan in place going forward for those cities after seeing what has happened in Hawaii?
I mean, I would defer you again to the state on what they're going to do to evaluate the response to this situation. As you know, as a emergency management and first responders community, we always want to look at the lessons learned so we can improve. As far as the vegetation piece, there are a lot of things going on. We currently, as directed by Congress, have a wildfire commission that has been meeting to provide recommendations to Congress on what we can do to support the building resilience within the wildland-urban interface. And that report is due to Congress later this year. I think it's going to have some really good recommendations and suggestions on what we can do.
All right. Thank you so much, Administrator. Thank you for all that you're doing, and thank you for joining us today.
All right. Thank you, Kareem. Have a great day.
All right. Safe travels. Okay. So just as a reminder for for all residents out there to continue listening to the state and local officials and register for disaster assistance. And this is a website that the administrator just shared with all of you, and I'll just repeat it, www.disasterassistance.gov. Again, www.disasterassistance.gov, and we will be in Maui supporting the survivors of this tragedy, as you just heard from the administrator, as long as it takes, providing all the resources needed for recovery. But before we go on, I have a couple of more things, and then I'll get to your questions. As all you know, on Wednesday is the first anniversary of the President signing the Inflation Reduction Act into law. Throughout the week, the President and his administration will travel across the country to recognize the impact of this historic law. And tomorrow, the President will travel to Wisconsin, Milwaukee specifically, where he will visit a clean energy manufacturing company, and the Vice President will travel to Seattle, Washington, and visit a company leading in the construction of energy-efficient buildings. She will be joined by Second Gentleman and also Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm. On Wednesday, the President will hold a celebration in the East Room where he will speak alongside Agriculture Secretary Vilsack, EPA Administrator Regan, Speaker Pelosi, Leader Schumer, and many others. Also Wednesday, Senior Advisor John Podesta and Domestic Policy Advisor Neera Tandon will join us here at the briefing room. These officials and others traveling throughout the week will discuss how the Inflation Reduction Act is key to Bidenomics and building the economy from the middle out and the bottom up. It does that in 5 key ways. The Inflation Reduction Act is the largest investment in climate action in history and puts us on a path to reduce emission by 50% by 2030. Secondly, the Inflation Reduction Act invests in America with more than $110 billion in private sector investments in clean energy manufacturing announced in the last year alone. The Inflation Reduction Act is lowering energy costs with several utility companies already announcing consumer rebates, including $400 million from Florida Power and Light. The Inflation Reduction Act is lowering health care costs by capping insulin at $35 for seniors.